Joel, Hinky, get the battering ram.
And no matter what, you must always trust the process.
Remember, make sure they hold on to Robert Covington. Get your hands off me, Cameron. Always take the best player available. Hey, be careful with those lottery spheres. Every kick has value. Maintain the long view. And value optionality.
I want to rewind back to 2013 real quick. Back when Sam Hinkie and the process began, and I fell for it too. I was all in love with the process. I was like, yeah, let's go. Like, I hear it, tank for picks, tank for better picks, and eventually they'll cash out. And long story short, before I go over this, I just want to say I feel like Philadelphia was a little bit unfortunate that the process should have worked, and it did somewhere else. I feel like process worked, but people weren't naming the process over there. I'm not sure. I should have done better research on how y'all were, but there's a better process over in Boston because there's the same timeline here. If you want to go back, so let me go back to 2013. Sixers, they had a 11th overall pick. They get Michael Carter Williams, and that's also a couple months in May before the draft. They brought in Sam Hinkie. If you don't know, the creator, or I don't know, the father of the process. So they bring in Sam Hinkie, they draft Michael Carter Williams, and then the next year they draft Joel Embiid at 3rd overall, but then they also draft a guy, Jeremy Grant. Then we go to Boston because it's around to 2013. Sorry, I'm pulling it up. Was when y'all got made the trade, when y'all traded Pierce, Garnett, made that big trade with the Brooklyn Nets, which obviously worked out sooner or later, which I don't know why I can't pull this up. There we go. Yeah. Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett for a bunch of pick swaps. So, y'all didn't really make a pick until 2014, Marcus Smart, which obviously worked out. Number 6, that worked good. Well, meanwhile, Philly...
Which, that was our pick, though.
That was your pick. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Not the Nets, yeah.
And, and the 3rd pick was Joel Embiid for the Sixers. Worked out both ways, but took a while. And then we go to 2015. Sixers' own pick, Jahlil Okafor, which was tough because right after that was a tough draft. But Jahlil Okafor, that didn't really work out. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my timeline straight. I go back to tabs. And then you get Terry Rozier at 16, which I think we could say, no offense to Jahlil, Terry worked out a little bit better. And I think he ended up going somewhere else, but he hit on that pick. And then we go to 2016. They get Ben Simmons with their pick. Congratulations, man. It kind of worked out. Did it really work out? Don't know. But y'all get Jaylen Brown at 3. And once again, even then, I was like, it's a reach, but it worked out. And then we go to 2017. That's the fated Markelle Fultz for Philly. And then Boston gets Jason Tatum. We think we've seen, no offense. It was kind of unfortunate, too. Like, Markelle Fultz all of a sudden had the yips and couldn't shoot. And then, obviously, Tatum became Tatum. And also, that's also when they didn't... I think Brett Brown was there, so they still weren't playing Ben Simmons as a point guard. So they needed a point guard. Once again, unfortunately, that happened. Also, by the way, around that time, in 2015, sorry to go back, that 2013 pick they used on Michael Carter Williams. Luckily, and this credit to them, they traded him away for the Lakers' first-round pick, which ended up turning into the next year. They turned that into Mikal Bridges. But, I don't know if you remember, they traded Mikal Bridges, draft night trade, to the Suns. And man, they could really use a Mikal Bridges right now. Instead, they spent their own pick later on, Landry Shamet, who solid player, but also ended up being on the Suns. Ironically enough, and Shamet was part of that trade that they got for Tobias Harris later on. So you could say, whatever, kind of a hit there. But I think in 2018 there, y'all bought Robert Williams, which worked out now. And then, obviously, that's about where I want to stop. But anyways, my point being, there were 2 processes going on. We just didn't realize there was one in Boston. And as we can see now, the Boston one is like the one, I guess you can either credit, they did their homework, or they did a better job drafting and developing. Nonetheless, the Boston one worked out. You can say the Philly one kind of worked out. Joel Embiid is like the crown jewel of that one. But, I mean, they tried to... they brought in Jimmy Butler, and really when they brought in Jimmy Butler from Minnesota, I thought in my head I was like, okay, this is the full culmination of the process. You have Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, and then unfortunately, they get knocked out in that terrible bounce against the Raptors, and then the dominoes start falling from there. They pick Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler.
Tobias Harris over me?
I'm not going to sit here and dog on Tobias. Congratulations, you got your money. It's if someone offers you a max contract, you take it.
Right.
And you mentioned, and we were talking about this, there was concerns like Jimmy Butler was an okay shooter at that point, but then Ben Simmons couldn't shoot, and Joel Embiid didn't really. His shot was still okay, but he's not a sharpshooter. So, long story short, I think we're towards the end of the process where we can kind of evaluate it and say it worked out okay, but it should have been better for Philly. They missed on a bunch of picks, and it's just unfortunate because even at the time, like I said, Jahlil Okafor, everyone was like, okay, slam dunk, he'll be good. Even Nerlens Noel, like they traded Drew Holiday. As we're seeing, Drew still being a really good player. They could really use a Drew Holiday right now too, a solid shooter, playmaker. Traded him for Nerlens Noel to pair with Embiid. Nerlens never worked out, and I think he ended up signing with Dallas and bouncing around. So, just a little research that I wanted to bring up, and anything you wanted to add there as a Celtic fan that I may have missed?
I think a key thing there too is the Sixers had to tank for their own picks.
That's
the
too.
Celtics because of the trade. The moment they drafted Marcus Smart, they have made the playoffs every year since then. So even while having the 3rd overall pick for Jaylen Brown, the 1st overall pick which they traded to get 3rd to get Tatum,
Philly.
which they traded with Philly. Yeah, so they actually turned. They had the 1st overall pick and turned that into Jason Tatum and Romeo Langford, and Langford was then used later in the trade to get Derek White, who's now a pretty key contributor. He's actually having a fantastic series right now. But anyway, so I do think it's just kind of interesting that, these two different teams had two different methods. Obviously, the Celtics one is not necessarily sustainable for anybody else because what are the odds that a trade like that ever really happens? I mean, it was just such an absurd offer that, that's not going to happen again. But I do think it's interesting that, while Philly is tanking and trying to build their own roster through those methods, the Celtics were better at drafting, making the playoffs the entire time. And in the couple times that they've matched up in the playoffs, the Celtics have had their way with them. They swept them in 2019. And I think that's maybe that's the only time they've played since that. No, they also played in 2017 and they beat them 4-1. So
and didn't Embiid say like a year or two ago too that someone called a rivalry? He's like, it's not a rivalry. They keep beating us.
yeah, he's like can't.
Man, JJ mentioned it earlier. This is not a rivalry. I don't know our record against them, but it's pretty bad. They always kick our ass. So this is not a rivalry.
Been candid.
Can't call it a rivalry when they always smack us around. So yeah, and meanwhile we're watching the Celtics, and if they beat the Bucks in this game 7, I mean they could be going on to do great things in this postseason while the 76ers are
sitting at home, and we don't know what the future looks like. Yeah, his future's not like grim. And I can go on some more about like what they can do, should do, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that was my assessment of the process. That's the point.